The next hand hemming sample we're going to do is a blind catch stitch. And if you are right-handed, you will start on the left side and you will sew towards the right. It's very similar to the blind hem stitch, except that your fabric will cross over each other, and your needle is now going to point to where you've been instead of to where you're going. And so the same idea, we are going to pull the serged edge down. This is another hem that sits in between the garment and the hem itself. And so you will put the knot in the end with one of the two methods that we did earlier, and take the stitch through the fold. And now I'm going to come 1/4 inch towards the right and take the stitch into my fabric right above that fold there, just catching just a couple of threads there. And notice the needle is pointing back to where I've been. And then that thread now actually crosses over itself to get to the 1/4 inch over into the fold. And then I come down and I come 1/4 inch and I catch that folded edge, still pointing the needle back to where I've been. And then moving the 1/4 inch, you'll notice that thread now is going to cross over itself, heading back and forth. You keep that thread in the middle. Don't be sewing above or below it. Keep that thread in the middle of the stitch. And so the thread is below me when I'm in the garment. And I move that 1/4 inch over, taking the stitch backwards. And now that I'm in the hem, the thread is above me. So the thread stays in the center, which then allows it to, as I pull the thread up, and it crosses over. What that crossover does is gives the hem a little bit of flexibility or movement. That it's got that little bit of give as it sews back over the top of itself, and so this hem can actually slip or slide a little bit. I don't know if you can see that a little bit. You can see that hem can slip or slide a little bit, and so it gives it some a little bit more motion, a little bit more movement as you are doing that. This is an excellent hem stitch if you are hemming men's suit pants. That quite often a tailored pair of men's suit pants, the hem is not actually straight. The pair of pants is actually a teeny bit longer in the back than it is in the front, so that the hem exactly hits the top of their sole of their shoe in the back and hits the top of the arch of where the arch of their foot is, the shoe in the front. And so the hem is on a little bit of an angle and needs to slip a little bit, and so this will allow that hem to slip and tip in that direction. So we're coming back and forth just like we did before, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this out so you can see in there. You'll see it tends to zigzag back and forth just like it did before, only if you look very closely, now you might not be able to see it on film, but instead of just zigzagging back and forth, that thread actually crosses over itself. You get little tiny crisscrosses at each stitch. And that crisscross comes again from making sure that the thread stays in between where you are stitching and the hem, and that your needle is pointing to where you have been as opposed to where you are going. And just like the just like the hand blind hem, you take stitches that are 1/4 inch, being careful not to go further than that, because you are zigzagging back and forth between the hem and the garment. It makes the stitches 1/2 inch apart out there on the garment, and so you want to make sure that you stay just that 1/4 inch, heading back and forth. And then when you get 1/3 of the way, we will do the same thing again. We're going to take the stitch into the close, and then I'm going to loop my thread counterclockwise, or sometimes I think of it away from me, and go up through my hem and up through the loop, and then loop it clockwise, and do the same thing. That will tie that knot at the end there, and the knot is between the hem and the close again, so it winds up being blind. And then in order to not have a thread tail showing, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to slide it into some of those stitches on the serge, and trim that edge. And so again, you'll wind up with, you can see the little stitches there below the serge that are 1/2 inch apart. And on the right side, you can see the little stitches that are 1/2 inch apart. And they are down from the top of the hem. So it helps to hide that hem because there's actually hem up above it. And that is a blind catch stitch.